Mannie Manim, welcome.
Thank you.
Mannie, I'd like to start by asking you when you first started lighting, what was the process like? I mean, who did the lighting? Were there lighting designers around or?
Most of the directors did their own lighting. People
Mhm.
like Brian Brook and Leonard Schach, that I worked for in my early days in the theatre, they did their own lighting. Frank Staff often lit for Brian Brook as well.
Yes.
And he lit Yemela Deuce, the big musical of the time, and I took it on tour, and it was on that tour that I was confronted by various stage electrics who said, "So where do we put the lights?" And then I realized that somebody had to point the lights at the stage. And,
Right.
that was the beginning of.
What did the rig look like compared to a modern rig?
There was always footlights,
Mhm.
and there was always a cyc at the back,
Right.
and the rigs. There wasn't a lot of side lighting.
Mhm.
First of all, because we had senior that went on and off into the wings, and I don't remember a lot of ladders. It was all stuff up above, and stuff from the front, and stuff at the back, and stuff on the floor in the front.
Right.
The footlight dip thing.
And the lights at the time?
Well, the great thing that we all used were acting areas, which many years later I used as house lights in the Lager Theatre when we opened that.
Yes.
But they were these great big bomb-shaped things,
Mhm.
and there were a lot of, I mean, there were real tanks of lights. You know, they were great big heavy things. You had to be really strong to do your rig.
And control wise?
Control wise, it was, you know, the, what can I say, the lever thing
Mhm.
that Joe talks about, and Dave had to operate, and the more sophisticated, the more banks of levers. So, you know, those wonderful ballets that Joe Friedman used to do. I can remember touring with a play called Child's Play, lit by Joe Mielziner, that again I had the good fortune to have to reproduce the lighting in South Africa. It was a pack production, and we got the Mielziner plot with the set and so on. And we were in Durban, in the Alhambra. John Hussey was the director, and we were in the auditorium, and Joe Friedman was the lighting technician at that time at that theatre. And we were totally convinced that our lighting effects and the fades and all that were the best in the Alhambra. And that was Joe manually doing all these things. And we had been on slightly more sophisticated things, you know, the Alexander Theatre and so on, before we'd gone on the tour. And I'm also convinced to this day that some of it was because it was also an audible thing to fades. So when you had a real DBO, you heard quah from the wings, you know,
Yes.
quah. That was a blackout. That's a real blackout.
Yeah, lest you miss the punctuation.
No, absolutely. And then obviously smaller effects, and sometimes you could hear the clutches spinning, you know, their handles going as Joe would be clipping on and off to make these things happen.
From what I'm gathering, you're largely self-taught then, or taught in the School of Hard
Well,
Knocks.
pretty much mostly self-taught. Certainly Frank Staff at the beginning, and then watching, you know. Brian Brook's lesson was, I want to see the whites of their eyes, and if it's going to be funny, they have to see it. So that was kind of, then with Leonard Schacht, Leonard was into colours. Leonard used to love working, and he was the one that taught me about the cold and the warm from the front feel of things.
Right.
And it was several years later when, I mean, the first person that I came across that really knew about lighting was a guy called Mishak Musia, who was our touring manager for the township tour of Busman and Nena, and People Are Living There with Athol and Yvonne in those days. Ken Leach and Julian Garlick, that was the cast that came up from Cape Town. And Mishak came to see Busman and Nena. He wasn't allowed into the theatre because it was a whites only situation. He sat in the lighting box, and we had a drink afterwards in the bar. That was a sort of private thing for the company. And I'd been used to, by that time I was doing all the lighting for Pack Drama, especially Francois Swartz Productions and so on. And everyone was always lovely, Manny, you know, wonderful lighting as usual, all that kind of thing. And so I was waiting for Mishak to give me the same slap on the back. And Mishak's comment was, "We must talk about the lighting."
Okay.
And that was great for me, because then I very quickly learned that he'd done something that nobody else I knew had done. He'd done a lighting course at Columbia University. It was a bursary. He was the stage manager of King Kong when it went to New York, and the stage manager of Spinona when it went to New York. And so he got this bursary, and he'd studied lighting at Columbia. And cut long story short, we actually lit the productions together when we went to the Brady in Pretoria. Mishak and I, side by side, literally created the rig and put the lights up. And again, he couldn't watch an actual performance in front of an audience. He watched it from the lighting box. But I think it looked great in Pretoria. And that was the beginning of me understanding a lot more about what lighting is and could be.
Right. You've spoken a lot about Joe Miles and you've recreated two of his
shots. Yeah.
And I'm taking it that you learnt out of both of those as well.
Absolutely. Now, what was wonderful about doing other people's lighting, and I've done that quite a number of times in my career, is that you have to understand what they were doing. I've just done one right now with Brothers Size. First of all, that chap lit in a university theatre where they seem to have endless resources, millions of dimmers, millions of lighting instruments, and millions of channels, which we didn't have in the Baxter.
Right.
I think we had every piece of spare cable in Cape Town. But the point of the story is that looking at this plot and analysing what the designer was trying to do, because I suppose it's designer's language, but they send you the plot. If you're lucky, you get a focus chart. If you're not lucky, you work it out. And you've got the cues, you've got the stage manager's sort of cue book. And from that, you start to piece together. It's a bit like working out a detective story of what did he mean by it. Why did he have that over there? Then as you get into the plot, you begin to understand exactly.
Right.
So those were big learning experiences for me, and still are when I work with those plots from abroad.
Right. What would you say was your big break as a show? That kind of the first time that you went, I'm a lighting designer.
Sure. I wouldn't know. It was a growing understanding. It was certainly the period at PACT, working with Francois Swart. Francois was the artistic director. I was managing director, and Francois put out this myth. He used to say, "Mannie's doing my lighting. He's the best lighting designer in South Africa." And I'd be present at these conversations, and when they were, Franny and I were going back in his car or my car back to Pretoria or whatever, I'd say, "Francois, you're telling everybody I'm the best lighting designer. I'm still learning. I'm still fun." He said, "Well, you better become the best lighting designer."
That's so Francois.
And Francois, you better become the better. So, in fact, I also realized that if I didn't do something serious, I was going to look very foolish very soon. And the person that was lighting at that time was again a director that I was very admiring of, was Robert Moore, Professor Robert Moore from UCT. He was doing Shakespeare and Chekhov and so on. And I learnt a lot by being production manager sometimes, producer sometimes, of productions that he was directing. So again, I was lucky to be learning from other people. But I think the first production of Joseph at the Alexander Theatre, again directed by John Hussey, and I did the lighting. And just something happened, and I just felt I was understanding the medium, and I was enjoying doing the show. It was delightful. I love doing musicals because they've got more sort of possibility for track-offs and letting your imagination go and using pretty colours if you like and all that sort of thing. So I think that maybe it's that Joseph, which in fact was my last production at PACT, was maybe the moment when I thought, hey, not bad.
Okay.